Hey everybody, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today I would like to talk to you about my top 10 tips for plant parents. So let's get started. They're not in any chronological order, I'll just keep talking about them as they pop into my head. So, number one, when you get a new plant, don't worry about the leaves, worry about the root system. Especially when you get a plant shipped or posted to you, the plant is going to suffer a little bit from that transit. It's going to suffer just purely by being given a different environment. Most likely the plant is going to put energy into building a root system because that's really what's going to enable the plant to grow further. And in favor of the root system, the plant might abort a couple of leaves. So if you get a brand new plant, it's totally normal for that leaf to start yellowing. If you're propagating, it's totally normal for that leaf that you used to propagate to eventually die off. The plant is really just taking the energy out of that leaf, sucking it back in, and putting all its efforts into the root system. That's a good thing. Leaves come and go, right? That's what the plant does. That's the plant's job, grow new leaves. As long as you keep the root system and the stem or the rhizome of the plant healthy, new leaves will come. Brettles, come here. Good boy. Which leads me to number two, use see-through pots where possible. Now, knowing that the root system is the most important thing to look after, we want to have a look at the root system. So I love using see-through pots because I can spy on the roots, but also I can assess the moisture level of my medium just by looking at it. I don't have to stick my finger in it. Now, we're pretty lucky in Australia. These see-through pots are available at Bunnings or at most Bunnings across the country at least, and they come in three different sizes, 10, 13.5, and 20 centimeters. And I use all three sizes, and those are the only three I really use. I have a few really large plants. They're in a 25 centimeter pot and they don't come in see-through, but where possible, I try and fit all my plants in one of these three sizes. Honestly, when it comes to pot size, don't get too caught up about a centimeter here or there. Oh, should it be 14 centimeters or 16 or 18? You know, it's probably not going to make a huge difference if you have a medium that is well draining and aerated. But I noticed that those three sizes work quite well for me. Now, I do apologize if you're not in Australia. I can't really help you with whereabouts you could get these see-through pots from. If you live in a country that is not Australia and you were able to get your hands on some see-through pots, please share down below with all the other viewers. I don't know what's available in all countries and whereabouts you can purchase certain things. So just have a look at, just check locally. Now, let me just have a look at what I mean by spying on the roots and spying on the soil. All right, so over here, we've got my Alocasia Regal Shields. And if you have a look at that, you can see how happy the root system is. It's probably borderline root bound. It could probably do for a repot eventually, but I know when I need to repot. I know when I need to water. I know if my plant is happy, just purely based on being able to spy on the root system without having to dig it up. Whenever somebody asks me, hey, my plant seems to suffer, can you let me know what's wrong with it? My first advice is always check on the root system. If the root system is healthy, then you don't really have to worry about it. If the root system isn't healthy, then that's probably what's causing the issues with your plants. But how are you going to check on the root system if you potted it up in a container that is not see-through? You would essentially have to dig it up, check on the root system, and then it's probably going to suffer just purely based on you digging it up. So you might check and you find the root system is healthy, but maybe not anymore after you put it back in. So to me, these see-through pots really changed my approach to watering, my watering routine. Everything has changed because I can now pretty accurately assess the moisture level of the entire pot, not just the top centimeter or so, just by looking at it. Another bonus is when I pot up a moss pole, or especially when I do a chop and extend, because of the see-through pots, I can actually check if the roots within the pole are expanding into the pot. And I can tell that the chop and extend was successful because the plant is slowly building a new root system within the pot. I enjoy looking at the roots as much as I enjoy looking at the foliage. So if you can, get your hands on see-through pots. It's such a game changer. Number three, use vertical space. If you're anything like me and you have way more plants that you would like to grow than space you have available, it might be a good idea to consider your vertical space. So most of my plants grow on these moss poles, and the actual shelf space or the footprint in itself is just that 20 centimeter pot. But I can make a huge impact with these statement pieces because I'm using the vertical space and I'm giving them that moss pole. So I'm kind of expanding the pot volume vertically rather than just using bigger pots. So I can fit way more plants in my quite limited space. and they really make an impact on the space visually as well. So if you like climbers, I highly recommend you utilize that vertical space to make the best out of the limited space that we have available. So using that vertical space is such a space efficient way of growing your plants in an indoor setting. Number 4, and probably the most important one, trial and error. Now, of course, you can do research on the internet. I hope videos like these give you a little bit more insight, and that's kind of your research as well. But whatever people say on the internet, including me, just take it with a grain of salt. I'm just speaking from my own experiences, and my own experiences are based on the environment that I live in. Now, unless you live in the same environment, my experiences might not be 100% applicable to you. If you have different conditions, your care approach is also going to be different. So there's no point in me telling you, water this plant once a week. That watering frequency depends on the conditions the plant is in, how large the plant is, how big the pot is, what medium you're using, and so on. So whenever you hear very, very specific tips or very specific guidelines, just be mindful that they might not apply to you at 100%. Always take them as a principle, or like a guiding principle, and then apply it to your own environment and apply it to your own journey. I've been growing plants for 3 years now. The first year I wasn't majorly successful, right? I did a lot of things wrong in the first year, and I learned from it. And all of these lessons learned, I'm now incorporating into my plant journey, and I'm incorporating into these videos that I make for you. But again, these are just my experiences that I've made over the last 3 years. If you live somewhere different, if you grow different plants, your experiences would be different, meaning that your lessons learned are different, meaning that your guidelines or your care tips might also be different, but we're all achieving the same result. Take whatever you hear on the internet with a grain of salt. Don't just copy and paste somebody's plant routine because you like the look of their plants on Instagram. Always take the guiding principles and then apply them to your own plant journey, your own plants in your environment. Trial and error is the way to go. Number 5, conditions versus care. When that clicked in my head, it really changed the way that I'm approaching my plant journey. So I like to differentiate between conditions such as light, humidity, temperature, airflow, and care, which is potting medium, size of the pot, watering frequency, what sort of fertilizer you use, and so on. The conditions are really based on the plant's DNA. That's not up to you to decide what conditions a plant likes. It's really based on the native environment this plant comes from. So there's not much you can do. You should really be trying to meet its native conditions as closely as possible. When it comes to care, however, there isn't one approach fits all. And your care is also heavily reliant on the conditions that your plants are in. So, for example, there's people that grow beautiful specimen in hydroculture. I use an organic medium instead. There's not one that beats the other. There's not one that's superior over the other. It just really depends on what works for you and the way you want to grow your plants. And you can have amazing results with both care approaches. The conditions for these plants, however, would be the same, right? They would still enjoy the same amount of light, humidity, temperature, and so on. You just might use a different growing medium. So when it comes to looking after your plants, make a differentiation between conditions and things that you can't really control. You just need to align yourself to the plant's natural environment, or grow plants that are native to the environment that you live in. But when it comes to care, there is no black and white. There is no 10-step guide to grow a plant perfectly, right? When it comes to care, you have a bit more flexibility and you can really try things out. That's where the trial and error comes in. Number 6, be creative. Through trial and error, you realize that some things just don't work, or you might encounter a few issues and you might not find a solution on the internet. For example, in my IKEA cabinet, I'm using a very strong grow light because I wanted to reach all the way to the base of that IKEA cabinet. If you want to learn more about the cabinet in itself, I do have a cabinet tour, which I'll link at the end screen. Anyway, so I've got a really strong grow light in my cabinet, which means that the plants at the bottom of the cabinet are really happy, but the ones at the top are getting way too much light. So I needed to find a creative solution to throw a bit of shade onto the top plants while making sure that the plants at the bottom still get sufficient light. And I just built a little shade cover from shade cloth and a coat hanger. That's it. I just saw the problem and I found some sort of creative solution Before I built that one, I had one made from paper and wire, and it also worked. It just didn't look that nice, right? But there's so many ways of you being able to solve that problem. Whatever solution I found might not work for you, or you might not like it, or I might have used materials that aren't available where you are. So don't get too caught up about trying to replicate something somebody else has done to a T. Just be creative, focus on the problem in itself, and try and find a solution that works for you, your plants, and your environment. Number 7, embrace the chop. Don't be afraid to cut your plants. If your plant is healthy at the time of cutting, your plant is essentially going to multiply. Imagine you have a plant and it has 4 nodes. You cut them all into single node cuttings, you propagate them, you let them all grow. They grow 4 leaves each. You cut them all again. Suddenly you have 16. This is exponential growth if you'd continue to do that, if you'd had the space for that. Now, of course, that's probably a bit excessive, but overall, it's really easy to multiply your plants if you're not afraid to chop them. And with multiple plants comes the opportunity to sell them or swap them, so you can expand your collection without having to just purchase plants. When I started my plant journey, I went pretty slow, like a couple of plants at a time, but I made sure that whenever I get a plant, I actually propagate it and then I'll try and swap it or sell it so I can, expand my collection without just having to empty my bank account. It's also a great way for you to just create lush plants. I usually try and have multiple plants on a pole or multiple plants in a pot. I don't like just having one empty little vine growing up a pole or just trailing down the side of my fridge. Like, that to me is not aesthetically pleasing. So I chop my plants pretty early on, so I have as many plants as possible to then start racing up. Also, when you chop a plant, and I'll insert a photo what I did with my Milano. So usually I do the chop and extend and I chop the full pole, but what I tried over here is I just chopped the top cutting off. The top is usually where the plant sends all of the growth hormones, right? So now that I chopped the top off, the plant doesn't really know where to go with all of these growth hormones. It has a large established base and it has a lot of leaves, so it's able to produce a lot of energy, but where to go with all of that energy? So I had 2 vines on that pole initially. I cut both of them, and then each vine had 2 new shoots, meaning I then had 4 plants. I then did a chop and extend, and all 4 vines then had again 2 shoots, so I ended up with 8 vines on that pole and so on. Now, of course, it's not a guarantee that every time you chop, your plant is going to reshoot in multiple spots, but it's quite likely if your plant has a large root system and a lot of leaves available. So it has all of that energy and it needs to redirect its growth somewhere. So chopping plants isn't just a way for you to expand your collection overall, it's also a way for you to just make each specimen in your collection look really nice and lush. So don't be afraid to chop your plants, but make sure that your plant is healthy at the time of chopping it, and you won't really have to worry about it. Which leads me to the next point. Start with your basics. If you're not feeling confident with your propagations, then maybe don't start with one of the most finicky or most expensive plants in your collection. I started with plants like Monsteras and Syngoniums and Pothos. They're quite easy. They like the environment. They're growing on the streets, right? If I walk around the streets over here, like I see Monstera Deliciosa growing in the wild everywhere. So I know they're going to have an easy time adjusting to at least my conditions. So I can work on my propagation care methods a little bit more. And only once I felt comfortable with the basics, that's when I started, doing like chop and extends and chopping my Verrucosum into 17 pieces and so on, because I knew that my methods will work and I don't have to worry. Keep in mind, this is supposed to be fun. Like, if you're worried about chopping your plant and you're afraid that it might die, then don't do it. And of course, make sure that whatever you do, it still is fun for you. It's supposed to be a hobby, but maybe just give it a try a couple of times, and over time, with experience, you will gain the confidence, and then you just, never look back. I now just chop my plants almost too much. I enjoy the chopping in itself. Anyway, I'm definitely waffling on. You can tell how passionate I am about propagation. Now, when it comes to propagation, I usually just propagate in water, apart from the plants on my moss pole, because they're already air layered. So that's it. Really low, I don't do anything fancy. I don't use any hormones. I don't use any, disinfecting things. I just cut my plants, I pop them in water, I put them in a bright spot, and I let them reshoot. Number 9, have a long-term focus. What I mean by that is consider what you want your plant to look like in a year's time. I start all of my moss poles with small plants or small cuttings. Now, at the beginning, that looks a little bit odd. You have like this tiny little leaf on a huge moss pole. It definitely doesn't look the nicest, but I know that this plant is going to attach to the pole and it's going to raise up that pole in no time. So I'm having a long-term vision over here. I want this plant to look nice in a year's time. What's the point in taking an already established plant and popping it on a moss pole and the top of the plant is already reaching the top of the moss pole? Where's it going to go? It doesn't make any sense to me. So if you want to grow plants to maturity and you want to grow them large like the ones behind me, highly, highly recommend that you start them with small plants and you just have that long-term vision. It might be a little bit annoying in the short run, but trust me, it's worth it in the long run. Number 10, use local materials and plants where possible. Now, of course, you can use whatever you want. You can grow whatever you want. Who am I to tell you? But have realistic expectations. Call me old-fashioned, but I like to go to the shops and I buy all of my stuff just in shops, apart from the cocoa chips in perlite, which I actually get delivered by a local hydroponic store here in Sydney, but they only deliver in Sydney. So unless you're in Sydney itself, I don't really know where to help you or how to help you with sourcing certain materials. Like these see-through pots, I just go to Bunnings and they're there. I just buy them. I don't go through a whole lot of effort in trying to source materials that I found on the internet. It's rather the opposite. I look at the shops that are locally over here and I look at what materials do you have available, and I get those materials and I incorporate them into my plant journey, or I experiment with them a little bit, right? So don't get too caught up by trying to source a very specific ingredient and having to import it, for example. I'm sure there's ingredients local to you. They might just be called differently, but they might have very similar functionality. So for example, if you can't find pumice, you might find lava rock. Pumice is lava rock, and so on, right? So you don't need to source exactly what you saw on the internet. Just try and find things that are local to you. Or if you can't find anything locally, try and reach out to local plant parents and understand what they're using. Same goes for plants. Now, of course, you can grow any plant you want. I just want you to be realistic that if you import a plant from a tropical climate that's not really supposed to live in your environment, you need to put a bit of effort into supplementing your conditions to work for that plant. That's totally not impossible. You just need to be realistic with the amount of work that you need to put in. Of course, none of these plants behind me is native to Australia, but these plants thrive in Australia. They thrive in our native environment over here. As I said, like you can walk on the streets and there's Monstera deliciosa growing up side of the house. It's like Monstera deliciosa is literally growing up like the tree outside. So I know that the conditions that we've got over here naturally are gonna be suitable for these plants. So I don't struggle having to grow them. Right? I don't need to put a whole lot of effort into the conditions part. I can just focus on the care because the conditions are pretty much taken care of naturally. So if you're in an environment that isn't quite as fortunate when it comes to growing tropical plants, maybe tropical plants aren't the best choice for you if you want to keep it low maintenance. But if you're willing to put the effort in it, good on you. You know, there's definitely lots of ways that you can supplement your conditions to make it work. But maybe don't start there. If you're a brand new plant parent, maybe you want to, start with your basics first. Anyway, you can see these top tips are kind of starting to move into each other. Always keep in mind, plants, they're supposed to be fun. It's not brain surgery. So don't get too caught up about exactly what you hear on the internet. It could be absolute rubbish. And I'm not saying that's because people are purposely putting out wrong information. It's just because people speak from their own experiences, and their own experiences might be of no value to you. So take everything with a grain of salt. Make sure you enjoy this. Make sure you enjoy this hobby. If it's starting to become a chore for you, if you feel anxious, if you're afraid of chopping your plants and so on, I don't know. Is this still a hobby? Are you still enjoying it? And if you're not, then maybe just reconsider your approach to plant parenthood. But of course, you do you, I do me, and I'm just here to share my experiences with you in case this adds value to anybody else's plant journey. Anyway, I actually need to head to the airport. I'm flying overseas. That's why you can see these weird dots on some of my plants. I'm going to have a plant sitter looking after my plants and of course looking after my baby Brad. So I kindly indicated what plant they should be watering for me. Anyway, I better get going. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Take care.